When a hunter misses past 300 yards, the first thing blamed is usually the rifle, the second is the caliber, sometimes it's the scope, sometimes it's the bullet. Almost never is it the real cause. Because here's the uncomfortable truth, most misses beyond 300 yards have very little to do with caliber choice. Hunters often believe that switching to a flatter shooting cartridge will solve long-range inconsistency. They assume more velocity equals more forgiveness. They assume ballistic charts guarantee field performance. But if you analyze real-world misses, documented misses, not internet debates, the number one reason hunters miss past 300 yards is wind misjudgment, not bad equipment, not insufficient velocity, not inadequate energy. Wind. This breakdown explains why wind, not caliber, is the real limiter past 300 yards, how it creates compounded error, and why many shooters underestimate its impact in hunting environments. If you value serious, data-driven firearm analysis focused on field realities, consider subscribing. This channel is built around performance truth, not marketing myths. Let's examine what actually causes long-range hunting misses, the 300-yard threshold. Where things change. Inside 200 yards, most modern hunting cartridges are forgiving. Bullet drop is manageable. Wind drift is limited. Small range estimation errors rarely cause complete misses if the shooter understands their zero. But past 300 yards, physics begins to expose weaknesses in judgment. At 300 yards, even a moderate 10-mile-per-hour crosswind can move a typical hunting bullet anywhere from 6 to 10 inches, depending on ballistic coefficient and velocity. That amount of drift can move impact completely off the vital zone of a deer-sized animal. At 400 yards, that same wind can produce 12 to 18 inches of drift. Now the margin for error shrinks dramatically. And here is the key issue. Wind is rarely constant between shooter and target. Wind is not one condition. It's multiple conditions. Hunters often evaluate wind at their shooting position. They feel it on their face. They observe grass movement near them. They glance at trees near their stand. But the bullet travels through hundreds of yards of air. Wind at the shooter, wind at mid-range, wind at the target. These are not always the same. Wind can shift direction halfway to the target. It can funnel through terrain. It can accelerate across open basins and slow near timber edges. The bullet does not care what the wind feels like where you are standing. It reacts to the total integrated wind environment along its flight path. This is where most misses originate, the false security of flat shooting cartridges. Many hunters upgrade calibers believing flatter trajectory reduces error. While flatter trajectory does reduce drop sensitivity slightly, it does very little to eliminate wind drift. Even high-velocity magnums drift significantly at extended range. The difference between a standard .30-06 and a high-speed magnum may be a few inches at 400 yards in a 10 mph crosswind. That difference is smaller than most hunters' wind reading error. In other words, caliber can reduce drift slightly, but it cannot eliminate wind misjudgment. Hunters often miss because they dial elevation perfectly, but misread wind by just 5 miles per hour. That small error can move impact outside the vital zone entirely. Ballistic coefficient helps, but it doesn't solve the problem. High ballistic coefficient bullets retain velocity better and resist wind slightly more efficiently. That is a real advantage. But ballistic coefficient is not immunity. A bullet with a superior BC may drift 2 or 3 inches less at 400 yards compared to a lower BC option. However, if the shooter misreads wind by 8 miles per hour instead of 4, that difference becomes irrelevant. Wind reading skill matters more than ballistic coefficient once distances exceed 300 yards. This is the point many hunters fail to internalize. Range estimation errors are smaller than wind errors. Modern rangefinders have dramatically reduced distance estimation mistakes. Elevation turrets are precise. Ballistic apps provide accurate drop charts. Most elevation errors at 300 to 400 yards are within a few inches when distance is correctly measured. Wind errors, however, are rarely within a few inches. A 5 mph miscalculation at 400 yards can create over a half-foot of drift difference depending on the cartridge. That exceeds the vital zone of many animals. Wind creates larger error margins than range once basic equipment is competent. Real-world hunting conditions versus range conditions. On the range, wind flags are visible. Shooters fire multiple rounds. They can correct between shots. In hunting, there is one shot. Adrenaline increases heart rate. Shooting positions are rarely perfect. The target may be moving or quartering. Wind indicators are subtle or invisible. Terrain creates variable airflow that cannot be easily measured. The difference between range precision and hunting precision is environment unpredictability, and wind amplifies that unpredictability more than any other factor. Shooter overconfidence past 300 yards. Another reason wind becomes the primary cause of misses is psychological. Many hunters are confident at 200 yards. That confidence carries into 300 and beyond, but the physics shift rapidly past that threshold. Drop increases, wind drift compounds, bullet flight time increases. Animal movement during flight time becomes more significant. A bullet traveling 400 yards may take over half a second to reach its target. During that time, wind continues to act on it. The animal can take a step. The shooter often underestimates how quickly variables multiply past 300 yards. The role of shooting position. While wind is the primary cause of misses past 300 yards, it interacts with stability. Even a small wobble combined with wind drift creates compounded error. A rifle that is 2 inches off at the muzzle, combined with 10 inches of wind drift at 400 yards, becomes a complete miss. Wind rarely acts alone. It magnifies existing shooter instability. However, even perfectly stable shooters misjudge wind more often than they misjudge drop. Why caliber isn't the solution? Switching from a standard cartridge to a high-velocity Magnum may reduce wind drift by a small margin, but it also increases recoil. Increased recoil can reduce practical accuracy for some shooters. Higher recoil combined with imperfect wind calls often negates theoretical ballistic advantage. The limiting factor past 300 yards is rarely energy. Most common big game cartridges retain sufficient energy at those distances. The limiting factor is bullet placement, and bullet placement is dominated by wind judgment. What actually improves long-range success? Hunters who consistently hit beyond 300 yards do 3 things differently. They study wind behavior in varied terrain. They practice reading subtle indicators like mirage and vegetation movement. They limit shots when wind conditions exceed their confidence threshold. Equipment matters, but wind reading skill matters more. Some hunters adopt a simple rule. If wind cannot be confidently read, the shot distance decreases. That discipline prevents more misses than caliber upgrades ever will. Ethical implications. Misses are one issue, wounding hits are another. A 6 to 8-inch wind error may still hit the animal, but not in the vital zone. Shoulder edge hits, liver hits, or gut shots increase recovery time and suffering. Wind misjudgment is not just a marksmanship problem, it is an ethical consideration. Past 300 yards, wind becomes the primary factor determining whether a shot remains ethical. Conclusion: the real limiter. The number one reason hunters miss past 300 yards is wind misjudgment, not caliber, not scope magnification, not insufficient energy, wind. It compounds with distance, it varies across terrain, it changes during bullet flight, and it exposes overconfidence faster than any ballistic chart. Understanding wind behavior, recognizing personal limits, and reducing shot distance when conditions are uncertain will improve real-world success more than upgrading cartridges ever will. If you want continued evidence-based firearm analysis focused on field realities instead of myths, subscribe for future breakdowns. Because when distance increases, physics becomes unforgiving, and wind is the variable most hunters underestimate.